Oh no, XR, quick! I haven't made a video in months. I need to copy yours. Can I do that quick?
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Just make sure to change some of the words around a bit,
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
and obviously do not show them this video. Um, I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yo, what is up, everybody? So it's been a little bit. I've been busy, but hey, we're talking about my top 5 favorite decks coming out at Moonrise. No particular order. It turns out that Merrick had a pretty similar list to my 5 favorite list, so cue the little bit at the start of the video. So no particular order. I just want to jump right into this. I'm going to start with the Windjinn Tornadjinn. These cards are pretty cool. So Tornadjinn is an 8/2 for 1 wind, 1 solar, and you can expend wind or solar in order to search your deck for 3 cards with different names. And if you do, you add 1 at random to your hand and shuffle the rest into your deck. Now, random sounds terrible, but with the ability to kind of provide a bunch of redundancy in your deck, let's say you need removal, you can put Earthquake, Royal, maybe Royal doesn't work in every situation, Boom Bat, so you're kind of getting ready for your removal cards. Or you can play something like, oh, I'm ahead already, so let me find like Ambrosia and some other cards. Like, you can find redundancy or find multiple cards that are good in the situation where you're more than likely going to hit something that you need every single time. Even if it's random, those 3 cards are cards that you want right now, so you're going to get at least one of them. So there's a lot of redundancy there that I think can make Tornadjinn a lot stronger than it seems. Additionally, in like mirror matches and whatnot, it's not going to be able to out it by like Sorlet, so you basically your opponent's got to use like Eddies or some other removal. So I think Tornadjinn's actually like a little bit of a sleeper, really powerful, and obviously it does die to like Cryoblast and stuff, though that is relevant, but it's kind of always comes out pretty consistently due to Windjinn's effect, and it has a powerful just search redundant cards that you might need for the rest of the game, and you can do it over and over and over again for as long as Tornadjinn's out. Now, Tornadjinn's pretty consistent to get out because Windjinn is actually really, really easy to get off. So Windjinn's a 3/1 for on wind, and when this Windjinn receives 1 or more wind, you can name a card for Tell 3. If 1 or more cards that name are foretold this way, you can add a card to your hand and special send this Windjinn to Tornadjinn from your hand or deck. So you have to kind of guess what the top 3 cards of your deck are to get Windjinn to ascend, which honestly isn't that difficult if your deck is constructed in such a way that you have lots of triplicates of cards. If your deck's constructed in a way where you can foretell and then trigger Windjinn, so you can foretell again and get it right every time. Or even if you do something like play Apollo into Windjinn, or Windjinn Nexus another wind to it in the middle of the game to get Windjinn to trigger into Tornadjinn. There's a lot of really funky shenanigans you do with Windjinn that kind of gets it to be super consistent to get to Tornadjinn. And then the rest of the deck build around is going to be general good wind stuff, which there's a lot of it. I mean, you're talking like Sorlet, the Pantera line, all these kind of powerful wind cards that we've had access to for a while. And now we have another super consistent, expensive kind of boss monster that gets its card advantage for cheap and lets us find the cards that we want specifically. So I think Tornadjinn is going to make a wind deck, even possibly a foretell deck in solar, because you can play wind or solar with the Windjinn Tornadjinn stuff pretty easily, significantly stronger. So I do really like this deck. Next up, I want to talk about Jawblin. So Jawblin is a card that basically every time you switch position of Elestral, you'll draw a card. And that's if your opponent switches position, if you switch a position, you switch position by your game action, the normal turn, you switch position by a card effect like Tsunami or High Tide, you're going to draw a card, which can sound pretty insane. Now, the hard part with Jawblin is going to be getting Jawblin out. Now, we've seen things with like Water Reanimator, we've seen things with like Tadpuff, where getting to a 2-drop water X Elestral, water plus something 2 cost, is pretty easy and consistent. So I don't think getting Jawblin's out. I think getting Jawblin out and having all the setup required to make him this card advantage engine while still having a win condition might be the difficult part of this deck. It's really cool when you can play like Jawblin, follow up with like an Armadon, which is 1/6 that whenever it turns position, you ping for damage. So it'd be cool to see if you can find him, kind of make this like water, sub-solar, sub-lunar deck with those 3 cards, with Jawblin, Armadon, and position change cards to kind of burn out your opponent, generate tons of card advantage, make this really defensive, like burn position control deck. If you start a turn where you have a bunch of Elestrals in play, let's say you had a couple Foamies over the past couple turns, and now you can go like, cool, play Jawblin, switch their positions into attack position, draw a couple of cards, attack Jawblin over what their defenses are, and then start swinging. It's a card that can really kind of exponentially blow up the more cards that are in play. And now it is good to note that if someone tsunamis an entire board of Elestrals, that is 1 card to draw because it's 1 or more cards change position. But if you do something like high tide one Elestral and then switch position of an Elestral manually, like even if you high tide your own Elestral and then switch it back, that's draw 2. Plus you get an enchant on the board. So there's a lot of really cool mechanics you can do. And a lot of the deck is searchable off of Schnark, which allows you to search a Water Lunar card. So now we're talking about, you know, adding in Dracking lines to the deck as well. Maybe adding in a little bit more of the Eddie Rockin' a Hard Place line to the deck as well. So all of a sudden you have this kind of Water Lunar deck that has 3 pretty viable kind of boss Elestrals at 2 cost that make a very interesting, kind of somewhat changeable deck where you can kind of go between like Kerberos, Dracking, and Jawblin, which all do kind of a little bit different things, where Dracking's a super aggro body, Jawblin's a little bit more of a control side of the body, but they all kind of fit in the same deck together. And I think that's really cool and adaptive, so I'm really excited to see what kind of Water Lunar, position control, or even just Water Lunar decks in general pop up with Jawblin. All right, next up, Self-Mill. Self-Mill is going to get crazy this set. The Blistrix line, if you like gambling, is pretty powerful. So we're going to start with Snowlet. It's a 4/2 for 1 Frost. When you receive 1 or more Frost, you can send the top 3 cards from your deck to Underworld, which that seems like, okay, cool, I'm self-milling. Why? But that's because the Ascensions, Aspral and Blistrix, trigger when they get milled off the top of the deck. So if Aspral gets milled off the top of the deck, it ascends over a Snowlet you have in play. And if Blistrix gets milled, it can ascend over an Aspral you have in play. That being said, these cards do have to hit in the right order. Asterisk, if you Snowlet into a Cedar Soar, which allows you to cast it from the Underworld if it gets milled with 2 Frost, you can then just hard ascend it over to Blistrix, possibly in the next turn. But this deck is basically the definition of let's go gambling. Combined with other self-mill tools from the past like Avalanche, Morolith, even some of the more Frost stuff, and Frostix, Keone, there's even some of the Frost Nexus stuff. There's a ton of stuff you can do with this deck. The only problem that this deck has is consistency, because it is quite literally the definition of gambling. If you go Snowlet and mill your Blistrix off the top right away, you're going to have to find like Rise from the Ashes or something to get those cards out of the Underworld. Like, once a card hits your Underworld and you don't have a Blistrix in play, you're kind of SOL on it unless you can find a way to get your Blistrix back into your deck, which unfortunately, I think the only way to do that is with Blistrix or Helios Chariot Ride. I don't think you play Helios Chariot in this deck. That's too inconsistent and slow for a deck that wants to go fast, big, and go gambling. But it's a really cool deck. I mean, when you can just drop a 3-drop on turn 1 off of just a Snowlet, we go Snowlet. Oh, cool, I hit Aspral. Oh, cool, I hit Blistrix. That's really cool, really powerful. And then your opponent has to respond to that. I mean, if they have like a Boom Bat or something cool, they can try to hit that. Your deck is probably constructed around a lot of these self-mill cards. So you're running probably 3 Snowlet, 3 Aspral, 3 Blistrix, 3 Cedar Soars, Morolith. So you're not going to have tons of space for runes and stuff, which could be a weakness your opponent might try to exploit. But generally, the deck is going to be kind of this uber gambling, powerful deck that if it hits, and you win. If it doesn't hit, you're just SOL. You're going to take some pretty nasty beats because you didn't get the cards in the right order that you needed. But it's a really fun deck. It's really cool to just, like, again, be able to go turn 1 Blistrix. Maybe you get, like, and then Frost. If you start, like, Snowlet and Frostix in your hand, you go, like, Snowlet, cool, you hit Aspral, get back your Snowlet, mill some more. Oh, look, there's the Blistrix, another Aspral, do shenanigans like that. The deck is really fun. You could do some crazy shenanigans with self-mill, and I'm really excited to see what happens with it. It looks really good, but again, it's completely reliant on RNG, so yeah. All right, next up, I want to talk about, again, water. Again. So we have Starbit. Now, if you were part of the Shattered Stars for last month, you've already got Starbits. Hey, by the time this video comes out, Moonrise is probably already out, but Starbit is really interesting. Now, on its surface, it's going to be awkward because, oh, you have to Nexus to Special Sense. So it sounds like it's a Wexus card where you're Nexusing to your Starbit to get it big, and then I'll go to Starbit Supernova, and hey, if it dies, you can then Nexus off of it when it dies to other cards to trigger your other receive effects like Trotagua. So it seems like it's a super stable 1-drop deck. But I also want to say that special casting a 1-cost Starbit Supernova is not terrible. So if you play this in like a Water Reanimator deck, you can also just like, okay, cool, you do your Nexus stuff, you get Starbit out, it goes to Supernova, and then you rise from the depths your Supernova back when it dies with the spirits that Nexus off of it. So there's like space for this to go into Water Reanimator, which is really cool. There's also space for it to go into Water Nexus with the Supernova stuff. So I don't think it makes an entire deck on its own, but I think it makes a really powerful, impactful card in a lot of other water decks that are popping up, specifically something like Reanimator, something like Wexus, where their top end was a little bit too kind of situational with like Lockagon and stuff like that, where this card just kind of comes down. It's a 7/2, so it's a decent attack body, something like a Cryovern in a sense. So it's like, think of this as Water's Cryovern. So it comes out as a big 7 attacker. It's not affected by Tsunami, which is cool. And it just gives Water that another good attacker besides like Galaxy, besides basically like, I don't know, Draking is decent. Like just having a 1-drop with Water that can get out. You can special with Foamy. You can special with like Rise from the Depths, and like Capricorn. If you're playing Water Reanimator, you can pull it out with the Capricorn if it comes out and it dies. Like there's a ton you can do with Starbit, and it's super cool to build around. So I'm really interested to see what people come up with. But I think its best home is probably going to be kind of slotting into a Water Reanimator deck, just because of the fact that it's a 1 cost that can't normal, but there's a ton of ways in Water to special cast a 1-drop is really cool and interesting. So I think Starbit Supernova will be kind of its own aggro Water deck archetype within Nexus or Reanimator for Water that are popping up. And lastly, we're going into, this is actually my favorite deck in Moonrise. I know I said there's no particular order, but this is the number 1 deck I have in Moonrise. It's just Lunar Phase. Now there's 2 kind of key things you can do with Lunar Phase, maybe 3 if you want to expand on one side. So we're going to start, there's a Lunar aggro package in Lunar Phase with things like a Void, Werepop, Farrageist, other big 3-drops in Lunar. Any big 3-drop you want to get out with, basically Full Moon, pretty aggressive. You just need to get an Elestral in play, plus have a 3-drop in hand and Full Moon in play. So if you have like Werepup, find Full Moon, set Full Moon, have a 3-drop in hand next turn, play any Elestral. Like there's a ton of stuff you can do with the aggro side of things, especially like a Void. Like a Void is a huge piercing threat that will just do 3 to 4 damage when it comes out. It's pretty nasty. But there's also Lunar Phase control with like a little bit more focus on the Voldusk synergies, where you're running a lot of Lunar Phases. Now in the Lunar Phase control stuff, you're not really going to run the whole Voldusk side. You're probably just running Voldusk and maybe 20 or so Lunar Phases as like your key component of like engine. You're running probably a couple rabbits, a bunch of removal cards, and they'll go with Lunar Phase control, which I like a little bit more because it plays just like classic like base set Fruit. Is you're playing a lot of card advantage 1-drop, 2-drop Elestrals, mostly 1-drop Elestrals that have card advantage associated with them, so that you can use removal to pop your opponent's board, heal with your guys on board. Like in the past in Fruit control, it was Drataya, Ash Rabbit, Rummagem. You just swarm the board with these little guys that generate card advantage while using all your counter runes and card advantage to find answers to your opponent, and then punch them with a bunch of 1 and maybe a lot of gun or whatnot. So now with Lunar Phase control, you play Voldusk, Ash Rabbit, maybe Ash Rabbit as well. All these consistent cards with all these Lunar Phases, cycle through your deck, and then end on either, you can go into the Like a Void stuff. It's pretty easy to just slap a Like a Void down with a Werepup because you're going to want to be able to find Lunar Phases you need in the time. So you're still playing Werepup, Voldusk, Ash Rabbit, maybe Ash Rabbit, and a Like a Void or 2. All your Lunar Phases, and then your kind of some of your staples like Gorgon's Gaze, Shield, PTA are still decent. And using those to generate all this card advantage, punch with a bunch of little guys, and then end the game on this big Like a Void push. So there's a little bit of the just pure aggro Lunar Phase stuff. There's a little bit of the control Lunar Phase stuff. Unfortunately, Voldusk, Volumbra are Volumbra, Volclips. The 2 and 3 are a little bit difficult to trigger. Now, if you can get the 3-drop to trigger its ability, you're probably winning the game. But if you can get your 3-drop and your Volclips to trigger its ability in the game, you probably already won, because that's a lot of setup. Now there's obviously ways that you can get that setup done pretty consistently and easily, and then you can do Full Moon to then get Volclips out over your Voldusk, stuff like that, and you can use the Lunar Phase that dumps Lunar Phases to get a really fast, like 5 to 6 Lunar Phases in your Underworld, stuff like that. So it is possible. Again, 3-drop Lunars are pretty easy to get out with Full Moon. You can search Full Moon, you can find Full Moon, you have card advantage for days in the deck. It is possible. But generally playing Voldusk and then Like a Void in a control shell is really good, or just going pure aggro on the Lunar stuff is pretty good too. And those are 2 Lunar Phase decks that are really interesting, kind of pull from the same pool of cards, but do things completely differently based on some significant engine changes you might want to do based on how many Lunar Phases you want to run. If you want to just go Full Moon and call it a day with Full Moon aggro, that's fine. But it's really exciting to see all these really cool decks pop up in Moonrise, and I think it's going to be really exciting, interesting first couple tournaments and meta developments with, the gamble deck that should be really good, but you have to basically gamble multiple games in a row to get to top cut. Position control decks, we've seen position control be really good, but that's because a lot of Elestrals don't have good attack and defense stats. But now we're seeing a lot of Elestrals with bigger stats that are relevant. So position control might not be as good because you have all these cards that can just drop with giant stats on board, and like Cedar Swords and stuff, which are pretty resilient against Eddie. The Windjinn and Tornadjinn stuff, which is super consistent. You get a big aggro body, but you can also find all your control pieces and utility cards pretty consistently, even if it's random. You're finding redundant cards, so pretty good. Whatever else I talked about in this video. This video is getting longer than I want to. It's going to be a little bit low on the editing stuff, but hey, I'm back, sort of, and let's go Moonrise. I'll see you guys in the next one. You guys have a great one. Peace.